Hello and welcome to Label Sessions Presents.
I'm Ian Montgomery, one of the co-founders of Label Sessions.
Label Sessions is a global platform that connects you to the best advice from the most interesting people, whether you want advice, mentoring, or ideas. In this episode, we have a conversation with Ramy Nassar. Ramy has been a leader in how artificial intelligence and machine learning factors into product design, digital services, platforms, and beyond. With a storied career, he's been the head of innovation for Mattel. He's founded his own venture called 1,000 Days Out that focuses on emerging technologies, how they can disrupt industries, and how strategic foresight can better prepare leaders for the future. Full disclosure, Ramy was working from home with his young child Riley that day, and you probably hear a few bits of Riley demanding some attention in the background. I hope it doesn't interrupt. So listening pleasure. Nick from Label Sessions finds out what Ramy's all about.
We will make a start. There we go. So, Ramy, you are one of those people that you have to describe with lots of commas or slashes because you do lots of different things. But tell us a little bit about yourself. What are all the different things that you're up to right now?
Yeah, building a condo building. That's a fun challenge. So in the real estate space, former technology person who used to do a lot of work in the field of AI, but now everyone's an AI expert, and they figured that ChatGPT has solved all their problems, and they don't need people who understand math at all anymore. So put that a little bit on the back burner, and really what I'm most passionate about right now is future thinking, strategic foresight, whatever label you want to give it. But how do we imagine and think about what the world looks like in 5, 10, 15 years from now and build for that?
Okay. And so did you in the past see yourself always on a path towards becoming a kind of strategic foresight person, or?
I actually thought those, am I allowed to swear on this or not?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
So I thought those people were shit because the problem with foresight is that people who, whether they are academically trained or not, in my case, sometimes they'll call themselves futurists, which I hate the term because it implies that you know what the future will bring, and none of us do. We can read the tea leaves, we can pick up on trends and forces, but anyone who claims to predict the future, missed out on a couple of big ones over the last 5 years, right?
Yeah. Okay. So what's the term you do like? So you do like strategic foresight. You don't like futurism. Is that a fair playback?
Yeah, I like futurist thinking. You know, I think that's a nice term too.
Okay. And you mentioned as well, there's different scenes of that, right? There's a kind of academic foresight thing going on. There's a kind of sort of more trends-driven foresight. How would you describe the piece of it you're most comfortable with?
For me, it's the practical side. So a little bit removed from the academic, in the sense of I kind of want to know what these things mean to us, and that us being the team I'm working with, board I'm working with, product I'm working on. What do these forces, trends, the biggest thing is how do we connect the dots? If we go back 10, 15 years into the past, start seeing those trends emerging, can we extrapolate that forward? In fact, I've always loved the word extrapolate, and now I feel like a copycat because Apple has just produced a TV series called Extrapolations that is quite literally, foresight and sci-fi in action made into a dystopian-ish future.
Yeah, okay. And actually, it's interesting for some people when they hear this kind of topic. I mean, what does the doing of strategic foresight actually involve? Like, what happens when someone gives you an area to look at?
The funny thing is, the way I go about it, we spend more time looking back than we do looking forward. The answers are often in the rearview mirror, at least the things that point us toward the answer, right? Those trends, those patterns, those dots we can connect. I'll give you a brilliant, brief little example. The notion of ChatGPT, right? Sonic, there's many, like any sort of large language model. Yeah, they've kind of gotten good in the last 18 to 24 months. I've got a terrific little 3-volume sci-fi series by a Canadian author. I'm Canadian. Written, I want to say 2000. I should look it up. 2006-7 kind of time frame that fully, I won't say predicted, but imagined this world. And in fact, the brilliant thing about the story, it's called the WWW series, which is actually not World Wide Web. It's Wake, Watch, and Wonder, the titles of the 3 individual books. Wake is about an AI emerging and waking up on the internet. And the only reason it's discovered by... So I fell in love with the book because it actually takes place in my hometown in Waterloo, which was at the time the headquarters BlackBerry, the headquarters of one of the biggest theoretical physics institutes in the world. So this AI wakes up and emerges, and it's actually a young girl who discovers it, and she discovers that she's visually impaired. So she interacts with the computer JAWS, which is an audio tool, and that's the only reason she discovers it. And one day, and this is the potential of these tools, the exciting thing, one day to prove to the world that the AI is not nefarious means, it hacks into the New York Times, the Washington Post, all these publications overnight, and the next day the entire world wakes up to the same cover story, and it's a cure for cancer. It went and read every cancer study ever done and realized by synthesizing all that information, hey, you humans, you already cured it. You just couldn't step back far enough. No one person could read and digest all the research ever done and realize if you make this protein, whatever it happens to be, all cancers ever are cured. It's implausible, but it's a fun thought experiment to think, well, all of our millions of studies on a particular topic, no one can understand them all. That's the cool side of AI. So I actually tend to look to sci-fi and things like that for the future looking stuff quite a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting in terms of science fiction, looking to the history. It's interesting as a Foresight practitioner, I don't know, as an outsider, you've lived through the tech experience, but also lived through like the Waterloo experience, which is kind of a city that it's still at the pioneering edge of things, but in a way, kind of built a future that didn't quite happen. Maybe in the BlackBerry story, like what impact do you think? What is it about your background that makes you a good Foresight practitioner? Is that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, BlackBerry is a great case study in failures in Foresight. I mean, there's in terms of mainstream companies everyone would know, you could just pick. You could toss a coin and either pick Blockbuster, Kodak, or BlackBerry as a brand that everyone knew at one point was the runaway market leader, and did not do a good job of looking at what changes were really happening in the market. And it's funny timing. Like I'm literally going to a special screening of the BlackBerry movie in a couple of weeks that is being offered just to former or current employees in Waterloo. All the theaters in my town have been booked out.
Wow. What an invite. It's both like film and therapy night, I guess, for some people, right?
It will be. It'll be interesting. And like there will be people there who have actors portraying them in a movie, like who just like
it's both dream and a nightmare, I guess.
Operate for a tech company probably never thought that she'd be a character in a movie one day. Like it's kind of wild.
I'm presuming you're not a character in that movie, but if there was one, is it when you look back? Because I guess one thing is being good at Foresight. The other thing is companies inviting you to come and have a look at what their future might be. Do you look back and think that there are kind of breaks in that, sort of like big breaks you had where companies started to ask you different questions, or you managed to kind of step into this world more?
Maybe. I mean, the challenge with Foresight is hindsight's easy, right? We can dissect BlackBerry or Blockbuster or Kodak or any of those and see all the things that went wrong, right? BlackBerry's easy. They just underestimated the consumer drive for devices. BlackBerry believed that corporates would pay for the devices to have enterprise server connected devices, and that one day everyone would just have their personal phone and a corporate device. Big companies, right? JP Morgan and Bank of America, I did a lot of financial sector stuff, who are buying 5, 10, 20,000 devices at a time, realize, hey, if we don't need to buy these 20,000 BlackBerries and all our employees can just bring their own insert smartphone name here, that is a major line savings, and we will figure out the security as we go. But to have that insight in real time and to see that, it's the frog boiling in the water analogy. It's any of those, right? It's a lot harder. And I think the only way to do it is to look at analogy, look at the past, look at sci-fi and see what it tells you about the future.
Also, your practice, I guess, is now you work across different sectors, quite different industries. Historically, you've done that. I don't know whether you see those things as career jumps or whether it's all in one line, but do you think it's helpful or challenging to kind of move between industries and sectors like you've done?
I think moving across industries and sectors is, especially in Foresight, is insanely valuable because it lets me see kind of those macro trends. So I do a lot of work in healthcare and clinical trials, in particular with healthcare, and it is a tech laggard industry or sector because of the compliance, regulatory framework, and the risks to people's well-being, health, and livelihood when especially dealing with experimental drugs.
Yeah. So much you can be the connector by kind of crossing sector, so you're sort of aware of things people wouldn't be aware of if they were in kind of one
Yeah.
silo.
And, you could say the same, like nonprofits. I do a lot of work with boards of nonprofit organizations on the Foresight stuff. It's really important for boards of directors to be thinking longer term. And even a board's role is to essentially mitigate risk and think long term. That's essentially what they do. And the risks are the same in every industry in a sense. But you can start to see these patterns again. So one of the big trends I see in boards and in nonprofits is let's stop being a nonprofit. Let's stop thinking like a nonprofit. Let's stop thinking like a charity and think about an actual business model that scales. Let's not shy away from words like customers and revenue just because we're a charity or a nonprofit. And again, seeing that happen across boards of nonprofits in different industries is remarkable.
It's interesting because I guess one trend is non-profits from a UK perspective maybe being more commercial in the language to think about the future. On the flip side, commercial entities talking more about purpose and some of the things that typically wouldn't have been a non-profit world. So,
and then you've got these hybrid organizations, right? And I don't know if it's in the UK, but in Canada and the US, you've got a legal structure called a B Corp, which is a separate type corporation that has, whether you call it CSR or triple bottom line or just being a good corporate citizen, baked into its actual bylaws as an organization. So in Canada, it's interesting. Nonprofits and charities are different. You can be a nonprofit but not a charity, or you can be a for-profit, or you can be a B Corp, and it's almost like a spectrum. But I think the gaps between them is starting to diminish.
Yeah. And do you find when you start to talk to boards, maybe in particular around futures thinking, do you find that certain sectors are more open to it, certain areas have more resistance to it, or like obstacles in the way as they think about the future?
The common pattern I actually see is they kind of come around. So this idea of, so the toughest thing that I deal with in my approach is that if I were running call it a half-day workshop, we'd spend the first 90 minutes going back the last 20 years. And I can see people grumbling and mumbling under their breath and not knowing why we're doing that exercise, what that has to do with anything. And then there's this moment where kind of the dots start to connect as they go back far enough in time that it starts to make sense. And they can literally extrapolate that same trend line forward and start to, not predict, but start to anticipate what changes might impact. That's the hardest thing.
Right. Okay. So it's almost like the sort of the human beings in the room rather than the industry that they're in that shapes that, I guess.
Yeah. And then I also have a massive aversion to the phrase trust the process. I won't say it as much as I often want to tell people to please just, I wouldn't be here. You wouldn't have hired me if I didn't somewhat know what I'm doing, but I won't ask people to trust me. I just try to. So I recently once said, I refuse to say trust the process, but me telling you that refusal, read between the lines.
Yeah, communicate some of that. You the words are in there, just cloaked in a different way. So it's interesting. Sometimes when we're doing these profiles of people, it can sound to the outside world like you kind of found your way into this Foresight thing. You then do that with global companies all over the world. There must have been some challenges along the way. When you look back, are there times you think actually this was were there tough times that lead into having a global Foresight practice like you have now?
Absolutely. I think building any business does. For me, my approach has always been as one area of pseudo expertise starts to either fade away, become less interesting, or get commoditized, I gradually step to another. So there wouldn't be a point in time where I said, I no longer do design thinking workshops. I now do Foresight ones, but certainly over the last 5-7 years, everyone out there thinks they know how to do design thinking. They all say human-centered design is how they do things. Some do, some don't. I'm sure you see the same.
But also, what motivates you in that? Because some people might see the current situation as, hey, I've been talking about AI for a while. Loads of people are talking about AI now. That's a great thing. I can go and just share my story at a bigger level. Whereas clearly there's something in it which you think it's less fun now. So what is it that motivates you?
Yeah, I just like swimming against the current, I guess. I think you're probably the same as some of our shared colleagues are certainly of that same mindset. It just gets boring when everyone else thinks they know how to do it.
It's interesting, though, because you, all the way through this, you've actually called out, you quite like some of the practical challenges? Because there are futurists you would speak to who are only really wanting to talk about 20 years from now because they don't really want to get involved in the choices in the here and now. Whereas you've kind of got an interest in that. Is there something in the motivation in terms of seeing things happen or something that's relevant to you? Or
Yeah, like as much as I will preach that we're not trying to predict the future, sometimes it feels good when you get it right. Nearly a decade ago, I was I was running a workshop for a deli meat company, just to be an instigator slash maybe subconsciously try to piss them off. I made a huge cover of The Economist. It's a fake cover. It was predicted the year 2020, and the headline was "The End of Meat." Living in a world with where the world has just decided not to eat meat anymore. There were trends pointing us towards that. Vegetarianism has risen more than double over the last decade. Still a small percentage. Veganism more than triple over the last decade. Plant-based diets. But the cool thing was that cover of The Economist that we conjured up was dated March 2020. In July 2019, Beyond Meat IPO, which was not the indicator that the world doesn't need meat on anymore. But all of a sudden, a company that made fake meat is now a publicly traded company. They got valued like a tech company, and then their stock dive bombed after that. Makes sense. But damn, if it didn't feel good to kind of like, we were 9 months off in the prediction, or sort of that timeline again, not the prediction there. And it was nice to sort of see that those trends, when you added them up, did point to that future. And it's only continued.
so the next question, it's interesting because the question is, how do you juggle things inside and outside work? And I don't want to, doubt our producer Josh's skills in this, but there might be some background noise when people listen to this podcast at different points in it. So, I mean, how do you manage all of that? You're running a global practice. There's a new baby in your life. There's stuff going on. How do you juggle things?
I guess I'm just fortunate. I just say yes to the things I like doing, and we've got a pretty small team, and we're all aligned, family-focused people as a team. And the only thing that's really tough is travel. In the COVID-induced virtual world we lived in, could do everything from a home office. I find a lot of the clients I work with now want to do things in person again. So that means being away for 24, 48, 72 hours. I tend to get back as quick as I can, but just fortunate, I guess, that it's not been too disruptive. Good partner who helps out. He's a little cranky today, but we've also got a furnace being installed, so it's not as quiet in the house as usual.
Furnace being installed. That sounds like a moment in the house. Fire.
We're not even going to go down the path because I also have raccoons living in my ceiling the past week that I've been trying to deal with. So it's just one of those weeks.
Yeah, good. So, I mean, there's plenty going on. That's good. Interesting foresight, interesting here and now.
But what I will say is, I've had online workshops where clients are paying me, not riches and riches, but paying me fairly for my time and expertise, where I've said openly, like, hey, listen, I'm dadding at this time. My little guy's been on more Teams meetings than most 1.5-year-olds have been. He was in my arms with his separation anxiety with me just earlier this morning, and like, hey guys, Riley's here with me, and it actually probably buys me more pity and understanding to put him in frame with me on video than to just have the background noise.
Yeah, exactly. We maybe shouldn't put that in the public podcast so people know that you're just going for sympathy when Riley comes on.
This podcast is brought to you by Label Sessions, the global platform that connects you to the best advice for the most interesting people. Around the world, we work with brands to connect their people to true leaders, just like the people you hear on this podcast, for live sessions of advice, mentorship, or sometimes to just collaborate on ideas. To find out more, visit labelsessions.com and book in for a demo with our team.
So looking back and asking a bit more about you personally now, I mean, if you could, what advice would you give your younger self coming into this whole line of work?
The biggest thing that I learned, just brief anecdote, I'm an engineer by training. First job was doing engineering work. I wanted to get more into human-facing stuff, which typically meant sales, marketing kind of thing. Had a great engineering job, found my way into a job at BlackBerry doing sales marketing, solution sales, tech sales kind of stuff. It was a great building block. But when I went and told my boss at that engineering firm that I was leaving, he asked why. And I told him, well, I wanted to get into this kind of stuff. His answer was, well, why didn't you tell us? And we could have put you up with a mentor and had you like learn that stuff while you do this. You don't have to make the big leap and you can figure it out. I didn't know I was allowed to tell people what I wanted to do. I just literally assumed that if you're not here as an engineer 5 days a week, then you're of no value to the company. And totally changed my perspective. At that point, I'd already made the decision to leave, and I did end up leaving. But damn, if that company didn't end up doing quite successfully with an exit that would have been
a bit of a shift. It's amazing actually asking this question to people. How many people get great advice from a boss that they're just leaving? Like once it's beyond the transactional work stuff anymore, things open up.
Just didn't know that was an okay thing to do. My 23 or 4-year-old self just would have thought that you get in trouble for that. You can't tell people what you want to do for a living, what you're passionate about. Got hired to do this, and this is what you do. So that led to just no longer caring. So the next time, years later, I had a team. I was working for an agency. I had a team of 70 people, a bunch of directors reporting into me. And I just got tired of doing performance reviews and talking about their problems. So I went to our CEO and said, listen, someone else needs to manage all these people. I will bill out on client work enough to pay my own salary. And the rest of the time, I just want to do other stuff that may or may not be of benefit to us as a company, but I won't cost you any money. And there's probably a win-win relationship here. Made the change. Everyone thought I got demoted. It was great. I was no longer in the leadership team. I no longer had a team reporting into me. And I build out a day a week, and I spend 4 days a week just doing things I thought were interesting. And half the time it helped.
That's a really interesting thing in terms of the way people think about careers in some ways, because it's like lots of people would structure their career around seniority, access to leadership team meetings, that kind of thing. But sometimes you can promote yourself out of that and actually do a thing.
There are companies that are good at that, right? Like Google has figured that out. If you're an engineer at Google, you can have a great career ladder where you are never if you don't want to be, you're never an engineering manager, you're never a director. You can be a senior engineer, a principal engineer, a distinguished engineer. You can make tons of money and never have a direct report, never have a leadership meeting, never have to do performance reviews for others. But in most organizations, promotion means your team gets bigger. And I've got a person I'm working with now. It's almost unfortunate because he was promoted to a leadership role, and he doesn't get to do design stuff that he loves to do anymore. And he's trying to figure out how to manage people. He's learning. He's getting good at it. But I'm not convinced that that's what he actually wants to spend his time doing.
That's an interesting thing. And really what you're saying, your advice you would give your younger self was kind of ask for, or it's okay to ask for help around what you actually want to do, or like say what you want to do.
Without sounding too cliche about it, I think that the current generation of people coming out of university and school and entering the workforce, there's all these cliches about millennials, not wanting to work, and Gen Z not wanting to work or demanding too much. I think that may have overcorrected a bit, but certainly I didn't feel confident, at least early on, in saying what I wanted to do and what I wanted to learn about. And then that one lesson led me to just not even asking, really just saying this is what I was going to do, and probably being a little overconfident. But
so it's interesting, and in a way you kind of got given that advice because it was through the question of your old boss saying, why didn't you ask? But I mean, is that question the best advice you've ever been given as well? That's one of the next questions. But
I don't know. It's funny. I recently had a team I was working with answered the question in some pre-work of the best advice they were given, and they did a sharing exercise. They were working on an organizational model for advice. It was a financial planning company. But I actually didn't think about it myself. I'd say that whether it was the best advice or not, it's the one that stuck with me and has had the most sort of profound impact, because I can trace out future decisions and think back to that turning point, that question I got asked.
Yeah, okay, from that point. And that leads into a thing as well, which is, so there's a lot of people actually talking to us just now around this thing of people working around AI or in AI or trying to develop careers in AI. What kind of advice would you have for them from a career perspective? Like, how should they approach things?
I think that we're seeing a pattern that evolved in just software development over the last 10 years, and we're just seeing it repeating. So I have a massive aversion to the word coder. Someone who calls himself a coder. It's not that you're not writing code, but you'll get these boot camps popping up. These companies that say, do our 6-week coding boot camp and then go be a coder. hate to break it to you, I spent 5 years doing a computer engineering degree, still didn't figure it all out, right? So a lot of software development these days is plugging in one thing to another, but very few understand the foundations of how it works, right? Like the underlying code. I think that the biggest risks we have in AI in general, any sort of system intelligence, is getting to a world where no one remembers how it works, right? Where we've abstracted the foundations of what machine learning, what deep learning are.
Yeah.
So all of the talk about, should we pause on further development? Jeffrey Hinton being coaxed or kind of baited into saying that he regrets his career, which he did not say, as far as I know. But I think the biggest thing that we need to remember is that the underlying principles of it are what influence how the systems work. And if you just keep layering abstraction on top of it, no one ends up. So, like, the biggest example is this was in uni, it was a 6-week project, and it was to create an 8-segment display. Not everyone knows what it. If you think of an old school alarm clock, the number 8, and there's 8 little lines that could light up and could make any digit 0 to 8 or 0 to 9. The amount of work to program that, like the actual low-level programming to just get that to light up so that when you typed in 1, it would display the 2 lines on the left, is insane. But we've created abstraction so that in the future, the person programming an 8-digit LED doesn't need to know how it works. They can just say 1 and it displays 1.
Yeah.
You can layer and layer and layer all kinds of abstraction on top of that. But now we're doing it with AI, which starts to get risky. We no longer know why it makes decisions.
Let's look ahead, I guess, in terms of what's next for you before we go into some quick fire questions. So, like, what are you up to this year, first of all? What are the things at the top of your list for exciting things or interesting things you're doing through the rest of this year?
Yeah, I think for me, more, I like the challenge working with boards, whether that is as a board director myself with a couple organizations or as a hired person to come and facilitate some of the Foresight thinking stuff. The reason I like it, there's two. There's one altruistic and one very selfish one. The semi-altruistic one is it's the right level of people to have this thing. One of the first Foresight workshops that I co-led was with a product team, and it was great. And at the end of the session, the head of product kind of came back and said, that was really fun, but it was a waste of time because the team developing our products doesn't really need to be thinking 5-10 years into the future. They really need to be thinking about the next year or two. Can you come back and do this with our senior team? So boards are the right level to do it with. The selfish reason I love boards is because they typically are comprised of people from all types of other companies. So a workshop with a board tends to lead to workshops with other boards and other organizations. So that's the selfish reason. And then I'm actually giving a talk at UX Scotland this year on Foresight to the UX community, and a talk at World Usability Congress in Austria, which I tend to visit almost every year. And so, yeah, those are a couple of things excited about.
I mean, all good places to go to if you've got to go somewhere. There's worse places to do a conference, So, okay, so a few quick fire questions. So the first one is, where do you go to feed your brain?
Books. And I generally have a rule. I break it once in a while. I try to read only books that were written before I was born, which is in 1981.
Okay.
There are exceptions to that, but I almost always am going back to books that were written far beyond my years.
There's a history thing going through all of this. You like looking back in order to look forward.
Yeah, and I also love books that were written without the clutch of technology, right? So one of the fundamental ones, just somewhere behind me, probably multiple copies, is Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence, nearly 100 years old. But every lesson in that book, at a time where even phones weren't that mainstream, the lessons you learn and how to actually influence others hold up so true.
Yeah, before this whole digital future thing came in, that had a lot of consensus around it, which is constantly wrong. But yeah, interesting. So also, you are one of the people who's done a TEDx talk that went around the internet for a little while on the trust economy and things. Why do you think trust matters?
I think as a facilitator, people have to trust you. So that talk that's over a decade old now, and it was in Tunisia of all places. And in all honesty, it was also an excuse to go to Tunisia, which was amazing. But I think that facilitation, I speak French, facilitation comes from, well, I don't actually know what it comes from, but facile is in French means easy, to make something easy and to help have to be trusted to make a process easy is what I think facilitation has. And you can't do it if they don't.
Now, we've done our research on you. So another statement you made at one stage, which was that if you had 5 minutes to teach someone anything, you'd teach them how to make a great elevator pitch. What are the makings of a great elevator pitch?
I used it yesterday. I use it 3 times a week, probably in workshops as an icebreaker. So the very brief backstory is I once found myself on stage with Elon Musk before he was crazy. When he was less crazy, let's say, I volunteered an audience of 2,500 people. They asked for volunteers. I was going to put my hand. Yeah, I'll go up and do whatever. And he asked me to pitch something. He told me I did a shit job. And then he gave me 7 words, and I now teach everyone those 7 words. And it's, you know how well we sow that. So if you give me those 7 words, just what they do is they set out the problem, they set out your solution, and then they remind the person why your solution matters to that problem. And the problem is that when you ask people to do an elevator pitch without that, they only talk about their solution, but they don't contextualize it with a real problem.
Good. What was the last tech purchase you made that changed your life?
Well, I've become a bit of a Luddite lately. The last tech purchase I made, I don't know if it changed my life, was this microphone here. I can't say it changed my life. It might have improved the audio fidelity a bit. You know what? I'm looking at it. I didn't buy my wife bought it for me as a gift, a telescope. And they are tech device. I didn't realize they're tech devices now. You can run it manually, but if you don't want to, you literally take your phone out and you type in what star or constellation you want to look at, and the motors pan and zoom and find it for you.
It's very appropriate for a Foresight person. Look up into space. This is totally. What would you say is your most annoying habit?
I don't know.
What stresses you out the most?
Uncertainty, which I realize is a little odd to say as someone who practices Foresight for a living, but yeah, it does stress me out.
What title would you give your biopic or autobiography? I mean, you're actually going to see a film that's a biopic of a bit of your life in a few weeks' time, which is exciting. There's like a double angle to it.
Yeah, I don't think I play a starring role in that. But, I just have too many different hobbies. I think it might be a TV show already, but Master of None.
All right, okay.
Notion of generalism.
I think also I Just Have Too Many Hobbies is a great autobiography title. I mean, that's...
I'm better at more things than a lot of people, but I don't have a single thing I'm really good at. And I'm perfectly happy as such.
2 more questions, a bit reflective. The first one is, what are you most proud of in life?
Family. I mean, he's still crying right now. It's not been the best day for him, but yeah, absolutely.
And then finally, what does your ideal day off look like?
It's certainly not at home. It's somewhere else in the world. I'm flying out tomorrow for a holiday with the family. So it's probably going for a run or a bike ride in a place that I've never been or rarely go to.
It's a beautiful segue into the end. So thanks very much. It's been good to get to know you better.
Yeah, thanks, Nick.
So that concludes Label Sessions Presents. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast, no matter your platform. And of course, start your journey with us today at labelsessions.com.